Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I am sharing with you a conversation that I had with leadership consultant Ahli on building quality mentoring relationships. Thank you so much for joining me. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us your style of leadership and coaching?
My name is Ahli Moore. I'm a management consultant, leadership coach, organizational change and strategy professional, but more than anything else, I'm a listener. All of those professional titles that I mentioned are predicated on listening. That's listening to leadership, listening to organizational challenges, and then helping the key stakeholders determine for themselves the best course of action forward. So I would say my style of both leadership and coaching is collaborative exploration. I use a few tried and true methodologies and techniques, but at the end of the day, I do more questioning, listening, and ensuring perspectives are shared so goals are met in a way that builds buy-in and sustainability.
I love to talk to people about listening, which sounds weird. I should be listening, but I know that Oscar Trimboli, his work, he said that we spend 55% of our day listening, but less than 2% of people actually have the skills to do that.
Wow.
It's telling. And when you look at it through that lens, I think you're like, yeah, I could see that.
I agree that we should be spending the majority of our day listening. I think some people don't. Those of us who do this for a living, those of us who don't do this for a living, we can all benefit from listening more than telling. We can only tell our perspective, or at least from my perspective, part of a collaborative conversation is telling your perspective only after you've heard someone else's perspective. And so that's true whether you're just in a conversation or whether you're in a coaching situation or a mentoring situation. You can't start to impart your quote unquote wisdom on someone else until you've understood their background, their experiences, what their goals are, and what they're trying to accomplish in the conversation.
Absolutely. So was there a specific event that empowered you to identify yourself as a leader, or something where you were like, oh, I'm the person in charge, I'm the leader?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there was a single event, because I think leadership is not a static state. It's highly contextual. There are certain times when I absolutely take the lead on an initiative or a task and a job that I'm doing. And there are other times in which I need to absolutely be a support role. Even in the characteristics that we describe as effective leadership, I'm constantly trying to increase, add, just generally explore. And so to that extent, I don't know that there was a single event, but there were probably many things along the way that I experienced both positively and negatively that caused me to say, I should step up here, or there's a better way of doing something here. So by default, by me voicing that, I became the leader in that situation because I saw what we were currently doing and I had a vision for how we could be doing it better.
And I really appreciate how you emphasize that importance of followership as well. It's great to be the leader, but you said it beautifully that when there's that moment when you can step into that, great, but just trying to be like just the leader all the time for whatever your reasons are is not as effective as when you can be the follower.
Yeah, and even in a leadership role, my motivation is to support those who are with me. And there may be some hierarchy where they're reporting up to me, but my job as the leader is to make sure that those people are successful in what they're doing and that the organization is successful. It's not about me being successful as much as me being a conduit for other success or the foundation for other success.
That's perfect. And that goes beautifully into our main topic for today, which is mentorship. So in your own words, how would you describe mentorship in its most general sense?
So for me, mentorship at its core is a shared desire to help someone who may have less experience than you, help them to avoid unnecessary pitfalls, help them to grow in their role, their skills, their perspectives. ultimately help them find success as defined by the two of you. It's very collaborative because in order for me to mentor someone else, or in order for me to be mentored by someone else, there has to be some shared understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, what success for me looks like, what success for you looks like. So whatever endeavor the two of us share as a mutual interest, it's a collaborative attempt. And it's not an attempt to create a clone of someone else, right? Mentorship is not, let me create someone who's exactly like me. At the end of the day, a mutual desire to help someone move forward, whether that's in their career or in their personal life.
I love that. And it really makes me think of my best mentor. His name's Will, and he was my mentor in the military. And what I appreciated was how the relationship evolved. So when I was very junior and he was a senior NCO, how it still felt collaborative. It felt like we were learning from each other.
Absolutely.
And then as different things happened, how we started to just rely on each other in different ways. And it just kind of transformed over time.
But especially in an adult to adult mentorship relationships, both the mentor and the mentee benefit from it. The mentor, obviously the mentee, will learn things that the mentor has either experienced or has wisdom on, but the mentor also learns from the mentee. At a minimum, whenever I've been in a relationship where I was the mentor, it helped me to have some self-reflection and think about the things that were important to me. How can I help or teach someone else unless I'm clear on my own philosophies and my own beliefs and my own perspectives?
When you're both adults, but maybe a generation apart, I also love that learning that goes both ways, because then it's, oh man, are my thoughts kind of still relevant? Or like, how are people thinking now? Or how are people in this industry thinking? And I always really love those exchanges too, because there is the great opportunity for reflection. And then there's also that, I've never heard of that. And now
Absolutely.
Something else for me to learn.
Absolutely. When there's that generation 1, 2, or 3 differences between where you are and someone that you're mentoring, you're absolutely in a position to learn more about current and relevant topics, trends, things that you may have thought you were the expert on, or you may have had a lot of experience on, but time has changed. And so it's always a two-way learning relationship.
Absolutely. So is it my best mentor? His name was Will. Have you had any mentors who've helped you to build your professional life or your leadership journey?
A lot, so many to name. For me, it honestly starts with family. You know, a lot of people discount the lessons that they learned from people in their family, but I think when you do that, you cut out an entire piece of your making, your upbringing, who you are. And particularly for me, I had some really strong and impressive people in my family that set the expectations for my moral foundation. When you're mentoring someone, or if you're a mentee and you're looking for a mentor, there are people who would be considered leaders, but don't have a strong moral compass. You are a historian, and I know you were in the military, so, and this is somewhat controversial for people to discuss, but at its core, Adolf Hitler was able to mobilize tens and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to follow him in his leadership. His moral compass was not centered, and he was a bad person, but he had a followership that is unmatched by most other leaders. And so for me, I start with my family because they set my moral foundation. They set the expectations of who I should be, how I should carry myself, what educational heights I should pursue. When I look at my parents and my grandparents as having achieved master's degrees, and my great-grandmother having gone to college, and so me being a 4th generation college graduate, that can't be understated. So I start with them. After that, there's numerous teachers and coaches that I learned from. And conversely, there are also plenty that I observed that I swore I would never emulate. In my self-reflection and looking at the people that helped mold and shape me, there are plenty of examples of authoritarian type of leadership that I looked at and said, I would never want to be this person. You asked about professionally, and I can point to a number of bosses, peers, even colleagues that I would consider to be mentors. And for me, it's important that I took a little something positive from my relationships with each one of them. I had formal mentors, particularly early in my career when they were assigned to me. But as I started to gain more experience and have more exposure to people in the higher ranks within the company that I worked for, I sought different people to be my mentors because of something that I saw in them that I knew that I either wanted to have, needed to have, or would help me to gain the position that I wanted to have within the company.
I also really appreciate that you started with that family piece, because I think in a lot of ways, many of us just forget about that part. Oftentimes when people say, oh, I don't like to work with a group, I'm like, what was the first group you ever worked with? And your family, you did work in a group and it worked. So you do know how to work in a group.
Absolutely.
What do you think are some of the mentorship qualities or skills or values?
I have a handful that are sort of the core, but there's so many more than this. But our podcast is only going to be an hour, so we don't have 8 hours. I would say self-reflection. I talked about that a little bit earlier. To have the wisdom to look at yourself, and this is self-reflection both from the mentor's standpoint and the mentee standpoint. You have to take an honest, sober look at where you are, what you're doing, what is causing you to achieve what you're achieving and not achieve what you're achieving, in your successes and your failures. So self-reflection is a big one. Discretion, right? Both mentors and mentees need to have the confidence that they can be open and honest with each other. And along those same lines, just honesty in general. You have to be courageous enough to give straight answers. You also have to be courageous enough to, and these are all somewhat connected, right? So courageous enough and honest enough to go back to that self-reflection and know when it was your fault that you are in the situation that you're in. I may be a mentee and I'm seeking some advice to get out of a situation or to grow or whatever, but I have to also ask myself, am I being honest that I put in the hard work that's necessary for me to get that promotion? Did I put in the hard work? Did I study enough to pass the tests that are required for me to move to the next level? So honesty. And the last two that I'll talk about, curiosity. It's the mentee's responsibility to be curious about the mentor. It's also the mentor's responsibility to be curious about the mentee. So asking open-ended questions, and then that goes back to that honesty and that self-reflection again. And then a generosity of spirit. So what do I mean by that? A generous mentor makes connections, offers resources. Someone who's serious about being a mentor will say, I'm opening up the lessons that I learned, the things that I read, the experiences that I had, all of this so that you can benefit from it. So the combination of those things, and not in any particular order, but I think they build and on top of each other, and they're related to each other. And there's another word that I'll go ahead and add on there too, empathy. Sometimes I shy away from saying empathy because it's so overused these days, but empathy is important because if you're a mentor and you're looking at someone who's looking up to you, a mentee who's looking up to you, and you're putting yourself in their shoes, there are certain ways that you need to craft the conversation, or that you can craft your words so that it doesn't seem like you are browbeating your mentee. I look at some people, particularly people that are younger than me or with less experience than me, and I immediately go, oh man, you should have done this, you should have done that. But then my empathetic self will put myself in their shoes at 24 years old, 26 years old, 30 years old, and say, well, would I have done that then? Did I actually do that then? Would I have been making those same decisions? And that reminds me, I'm here to impart wisdom, not tell them that they were doing things, necessarily doing things wrong, because I wasn't doing those things right either when I was their age or with their level of experience.
Yes, being able to hold that space in a way that lets people kind of figure things out on their own a little bit, while also, I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, it's teaching people where to look, but not what to see.
Yep.
So earlier you had mentioned that you had some formal mentors.
Yep.
And then during that time, you also sought out other people whose qualities you liked as far as mentors. So with that, what are the pros and cons of being assigned a mentor versus finding one for yourself?
The pros of being assigned a mentor is that it ensures that it gets done. When there's a formal mentor program in place, whether that be in the organization that you work for or in your educational setting, when there's a formal mentor program in place and it has strong policies and parameters and expectations, there's a certain level of consistency, conformity in the experience that you're going to receive. And part of that, when you're assigned a mentor, I'm assuming that that mentor has been coached on how to be a mentor, what they are supposed to be doing in this relationship. And so there's some consistency there, but there's cons as well. It forces a relationship that may not otherwise be normal. When you're assigned a mentor, hopefully the people doing the assigning have looked at more than just the demographics. And we'll talk about that in just a second, but they're looking at the experience that you're trying to have. Does this mentor share some perspective that's going to help you? And so they assign you this mentor. But if this isn't a natural relationship, or there are some inconsistencies between what you're trying to get out of this relationship and what the mentor is able to provide, then obviously it doesn't work. When you find one for yourself, you are looking for some very specific things. And so it checks certain boxes that you want to have in a mentor. But then the con of that is it is incumbent on you to be very proactive in doing that, because if it's not assigned to you, you have to go out and seek one and find one and make sure that that person is also willing to be a mentor.
So if someone self-identifies as saying like, I need a mentor, what are some of the ways that they can go about finding one? And what qualities should they look for?
I'll speak from my own experience, and that is I'm looking for experience. I'm looking for someone that I trust. Going back to those things that I said earlier around honesty, discretion, self-reflection, I know from talking with people before I've asked them for assistance or to be a mentor, based on how they've interacted with me, if this is a person who I would consider to be honest, if this is a person that I would consider to be generous with their advice and with their wisdom. And so I look for those things. And at the same time, talked about the demographics earlier, there are pros and cons to that as well. I'll just use some, real life. These are not hypothetical situations, but these are things that I experienced. I worked for a company where the majority of the people didn't look like me. It was a very homogenous white organization, but there was an African-American man who had made it to the partnership level in this company. At that time, I wanted, I was just starting. I was decades away from being a partner at that time, but that was part of my overall goal, was to be a partner one day. And so I sought him out to just ask about his journey, because someone who shared, at least from an ethnicity or race standpoint, a gender standpoint, I just wanted to know what were some of the things that he experienced along the way. What were some of the things that were positive? What were some of the things that were negative? And how did he approach those? Just so I could have a frame of reference in case I ran into some of those similar types of issues or challenges. Now, that is a pro. At the same time, I sought people out that looked nothing like me, that were not of they didn't identify as the same gender. They were not of the same ethnicity or race. We were not from the same geographic areas of the country, but I was seeking them out because they had a particular knowledge set or a skill set in something that I was also working on or interested in. And so it had nothing to do with finding someone that I saw myself in. It was, I'm seeking to be a professional in organizational change, and you are a professional in organizational change. Or one day I want to be a professional leadership coach, and you do that for a living. Help me understand what your journey was, what your path was to success, how much work is in front of me in these scenarios. So I'd go about looking for those qualities, and also at times people who may share an experience that I share.
I really appreciate that. And I feel the same way as far as when I'm looking for someone to be in a mentoring relationship with. It's very much, what's the vibe of how we interact? Is it comfortable? Is it weird? I've definitely had people who they're like, oh, I'm going to tell you a story and it's going to teach you something. And I'm like, it's not topical and it's too long.
It goes both ways. I've had people ask me to mentor to them, and everything I say to them, they push back against. And they say, that's not going to work. That's not how the world works. And I'm telling them from my own lived experience what I've done. And they say, that's not the way the world works. And I've told them this probably isn't the right relationship we can still be friends. We can be coworkers. We can be whatever. We can be fraternity brothers. But we don't need to think of ourselves as mentor, mentee, because if you're not willing to actually listen to anything that I'm saying, then there's no need for us to consider myself to be a mentor.
I know sometimes I mentor young ladies who are trying to get into graduate programs.
Mhm.
And what's so interesting about that is that they're not even on a spectrum. They're either like, you've done this, who should I talk to? How could I do this? How could I do this? Right. So they're like, we know, to move along this process. And then other people, I think someone else told them it was a different way.
Mhm.
And so then those are the ones who tend to be like, nope, that's not how it is. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I sit on the board of admissions. I'm telling you this is how it is.
and even when people push back, as long as it's being done from, as I said earlier, from a space of curiosity, where they're asking, they may be pushing back because they want more information. They may be pushing back because they experience something different. If their go-to each time is to tell you, no, that's wrong, then that's not a healthy relationship, because at the end of the day, almost all of what we talk about is opinion based. There are absolutely some facts, but you're asking me to share my opinions, you're asking me to share my experiences, and I'm giving those to you. I'm not wrong in my opinion, right? Because there's no fact in an opinion. At the same time, as I tell you something, if you agree or you disagree, you're more than entitled to that. But don't waste our collective time if all you're going to do is push back.
Yes. But I also liked how you highlighted that sometimes in that pushback, that's a real highlight. That can be a real learning. Like maybe I'm not giving enough information and they need more, or maybe it could be done a different way.
Yeah.
Let's explore that too. So how did both the mentor and the mentee continue to build the mentoring relationship over time?
I think we talked a little bit about this when I said, as long as you're both mutually invested in this and that you're both learning, when you've stopped learning as the mentee or as the mentor, you have nothing more to give, then as a formal or informal relationship, mentoring relationship, it's probably time to end it. But if you're continuing to have fruitful conversations in which you're both expressing things that help both of you grow, then that's how you continue to build on the mentoring relationship. There are people that I consider to be mentors that I've had on my team of mentors for 30 plus years. I know that I can pick up the phone and call them, and the relationship has blossomed into more than just a mentoring relationship. It's a friendship on top of a mentor relationship on top of a friendship, right? So they call me for things now, and in certain instances we're peers, and where they've been my mentor for so long, but now I'm a professional in certain areas, they may call on me for advice or mentorship or my opinion on certain matters, where it all started as them being a mentor for me. So as long as it's still mutually beneficial, it's still something that you're both getting what you need out of the relationship, then it should naturally continue to grow.
And I love that you said how it blossomed, and it's mentorship and friendship and all these different things, because I think that the strongest mentoring relationships that I've had where I've been on either end have in fact become something different. So it started as very, formal in some way, but then eventually it emerged into, yes, these people are absolutely my friends. And because we had such a strong mentoring connection, I also know that they know how to kindly hurt my feelings when it's what's best for me. Whereas my other friends are just going to be like, you're killing it, you're doing great, when maybe I'm not.
And as a mentor, to see people that were your mentees, to see people that you have mentored grow and blossom into being highly successful people, for me, there's no better feeling. I have some folks that I've known, even people that I've mentored when I was in college and they were in high school, and now they are wildly successful business professionals. They're wildly successful husbands, wives, things like that. They have multiple degrees. They do, they make a ton of money, travel the world. They do all these things. And I look back and say, and I feel like I had, even if it's a small part, I had a small part in their development and in their growth. And it's just self-fulfilling.
Yes. In my experience, I have also had people who would approach me and say, oh, how did you get that person as your mentor? And I'm like, I asked. I just went to that person and asked. And the person who was asking me would say, oh, well, I don't know if I could do that. So with that, it really got me thinking about the role of confidence in mentoring. So what are your thoughts on the role of confidence in mentoring?
I would say that confidence goes hand in hand with how you prioritize things. I tend to have a much higher level of confidence in things that are extremely important to me. And the things that don't really matter, I may not be as confident or as willing to start that relationship or ask for that relationship. If I'm in a company and I'm struggling, or if I'm in an organization, I'm struggling, and I know I need help, and it's urgent and it's a high priority item, then that will help me, whether I call it confidence or not, it'll at least be the platform to push me forward to ask for a mentor. But I do think confidence is important, and it doesn't have to be assertiveness, although I think that's a good quality. It certainly doesn't have to be aggressiveness. It doesn't have to be arrogance or anything like that, but it goes back to that self-reflection. I'm asking someone to assist me in things that I'm interested in or that I have a gap that I want to grow in. One of the things, going back to a successful or a good mentor, having that generosity, if the person isn't the right person, they'll turn you down. If they are the right person and the match is a good match, then you've taken the initiative, and your mentor has seen that you've taken the initiative to approach her or to approach him and ask to build this relationship. If they agree to it, that should make the bond even stronger because they've seen that you've been proactive in doing it. So I think confidence plays a role. It shows up in different ways.
Yes, I love that it shows up in different ways. What are the pros and cons of formal versus informal mentorship programs?
Just from a formality standpoint, typically what I've seen, a pro of a formal mentoring relationship or a formal mentoring program is that it does have some baseline fundamental rules around what you are able to do and not able to do. And so it adds to the consistency of the program. But at the same time, typically that formal type of program has a beginning point and an end point, where an informal mentoring relationship may go on forever. It goes on for as long as you need it. When I've seen some formal programs that say, this is a 6-month mentoring program, it's more like an apprenticeship. It's more like, hey, you enter here and you exit here. Whereas I said before, I have some people that I consider to be my mentors that we've been in communication for more than 30 years. And so that's one of the pros of that informal type of relationship, is that it goes for as long as it's beneficial to the mentor and mentee.
And one of the things that I really love that you said in there was that it adds to the consistency, like one of the pros of a formal program. I have found that in my own experience, the more successful mentorship relationships I've had have been informal, but I don't want to discredit the fact that not everybody has had good mentors and not everybody knows how to find them. So sometimes a formal program, even if it just shows somebody the steps of how to be a good mentee or be a good mentor, could in fact springboard other relationships in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just backing up a couple of statements, not everyone has had a great mentor. There are plenty of people who've been in mentoring relationships and have been led astray, or the mentor has only said, well, this is the way I did it. This is the way I did it. This is the way you should do it. If you are not that person, eventually you're going to have to find your own footing. You're going to have to find your own perspectives. Even if the mentor has been highly successful, unless you are going to do everything exactly that way and you are that person, you're going to have a different journey in your professional path. And so that formal training, when we talk about formal programs, typically the more successful programs have a structure, the more successful formal programs have a structure that at least gives the mentor some basic coaching on how they should be mentoring their mentees.
Absolutely. You've built this amazing mentorship relationship, and now things are just not the same as they were, and maybe it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. So what would you say are some of the telltale signs of when it's time to move on from a mentor?
It doesn't have to necessarily be negative. It can be positive that you've graduated out of the need for this mentor. You have received all of the mentoring and coaching and all of the wisdom that this person can impart on you. If it was a successful informal relationships and you've received what you needed from this person, maybe you've graduated from a mentor-mentee to just a couple of friends. A couple of friends where one was more experienced and now you're either on that same level or you're sharing a different experience, or you've just gotten everything that this person could share with you and now you're colleagues, but not necessarily a mentor-mentee. Now, the converse of that, right, is you're moving on because it's no longer working, or maybe this person is the mentor has decided, hey, there's nothing more that I need to give to you. You have what you need. Now you need to go and put these skills into practice. Basically, just going back to what I said earlier about establishing a mutually beneficial relationship. When there's nothing else to learn, whether you want to consider it to be positive or negative, when there's nothing else to learn, or there's nothing else to share, or the relationship is just not working in terms of helping the mentee grow or helping the mentor grow, then it's time to move on. And you can feel when that's happening, typically. If it feels like you're pressing, if it feels like at the end of this, we don't feel good about where we are. At the end of each mentoring session, you should feel good about what just occurred. Even if it's critical content and critical feedback that you're sharing, it's still done in this growth sort of space. If at the end of this, you're like, oh, all we did was get on the phone and argue, all we did was meet in person and argue for 60 minutes, it's not worth your time.
Is there anything else about mentorship that you would like to add?
Do it often, like Nike, just do it. As someone who's experienced, you're still never out of the need for a mentor or a coach or someone who can help you. Even you think of the greatest athletes, they still have a coach. You think of the greatest, leaders, they still have a coach that helps them just bounce perspectives off of, look at some of the gaps, some of the blind spots that they may have. So I think you should always be seeking mentorship, assistance from those who may have been there, done that. And then as a mentor, it can get, if you have too many mentees, it can stretch you pretty thinly. So be judicious in how many people you take on as mentees. But one of the most, as I said earlier, one of the most fulfilling things that I've personally experienced is watching people be successful. And so I would encourage everyone to be both a mentor and a mentee.
What leadership advice would you offer current leaders in any organization or industry?
I love current leaders because I think right now we're all experiencing and we're all witnessing that flexibility is the key to sustainability. Being able to pivot our organizations, our businesses in response to, but also to be proactive so that we can mitigate negative things happening to our business, as we saw with the pandemic, as we see with just so many changes that are happening. It used to be that sustainability is based on having this core concept, and it's almost like, a bulldozer. We're going to use this, whatever this core concept is, we're going to blow through everything, and that's how we're going to stay sustainable. Now it's our ability to be nimble, flexible, agile, be able to be responsive to changing market factors and trends, and also being proactive, foreseeing what might happen and being flexible. That's what's going to keep us in business or as a viable, sustainable organization.
And what I love about that is, so I think highlighted throughout just the concept of leadership, that there is no one right way, right? It's like unique to you and the people that you lead and your organization. So I just love that tie-in. Do you have a book or resource that you recommend to others?
There's a publishing company, Barrett Kohler, that's BERRETTKOEHLER, Barrett Kohler Publishers or Publishing, that publishes a number of books that are aimed at business professionals, but it's about building morally strong businesses that are empathetic, businesses that are successful, but businesses that find their success through building strong leaders. I would encourage people to just check out their series of books and just look at the plethora of topics that they have there.
If people want to reach out to you, how and where can they find you?
I have a company. It's called X Factor Solutions. It's the letter X, and it's a dash, and then Factor, FACTOR Solutions, SOLUTIONS. You can reach me at AMORE. Those are my initials, Ali Moore. So it's AMOORE at xfactorsolutions.com with a dash between the X and the F. And it's also the website. So you can go check me out there too. www.xfactorsolutions.com.
Awesome. All right. This has been amazing.
This is wonderful. I loved it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, You can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles, and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast, and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.